Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
In 1955, at the height of the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union began a heated competition known as the space race, competing to show whose technological advancements are better. By the early 1960s, the United States was losing the space race to the Soviet Union, so on September 12, 1962, President John F. Kennedy gave a speech about the US's plans to take their next project to the moon.
Then, on July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 mission touched down on the moon, marking a major turning point in history for space exploration. Apollo 11 had a massive impact on the world by advancing technology, providing a new perspective of Earth, uniting the world, and opening up opportunities for further space exploration. The Cold War began on March 12, 1947, shortly after the end of World War II. It was more than just a battle between communism and capitalism. It was a battle of distrust, fear, and nuclear arms. After World War II, the Berlin Wall was erected, splitting Germany in two. The western half was controlled by the US, while the eastern half was under Soviet control. While the US enforced democracy in their half of Germany, the Soviet Union enforced communism. The Soviet Union feared and distrusted the US because they were the only country that had used an atomic bomb. On the other hand, the US disagreed with the way that the Soviets treated people and believed that communism violated human rights. All of this led to both sides stockpiling large quantities of nuclear weapons that could be launched at each other if necessary.
However, if they wanted to launch their bombs across the world at each other, both countries had to develop rockets capable of traveling long distances at high speeds. A few years later, both countries announced their intentions to use the rockets they had developed for launching nuclear bombs to instead launch satellites into space. Soon, both the US and the Soviet Union had plans to launch satellites into space. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, marking the first milestone in the space race. Then, about a month later, they launched Sputnik 2, which carried a dog named Laika. Many Americans were still frightened by the launches of Sputnik 1 and 2 and scared of what it meant for the US. Congress then began to claim that they needed more funding towards military, space, and technology. So, on October 1, 1958, the US formed the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, also known as NASA. However, the Soviets' first milestones couldn't be ignored and was giving them a lead in the space race. Another major first was marked on April 12, 1961, when the Soviet Union launched the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space.
The US was losing the space race and needed a way to catch up. NASA's first project began in 1958 with Project Mercury. This project mainly focused on getting into space, then eventually other planetary bodies. On September 12, 1962, President John F. Kennedy rose from his seat at Rice University to give his famous "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech, in which he declared the US would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade and push ahead in the space race.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
A few years after President Kennedy's moon speech, NASA started Project Gemini. It included training astronauts and ground crew for the Apollo program and also testing equipment, procedures, and other things necessary for going to the moon. According to NASA, Project Gemini was essentially their bridge to the moon.
When NASA's missions began to break Soviet records, Red Air Force General Nikolai Kamenin stated in his journal that, during the past year, Americans have made great strides in outer space. This would seem to provide ample grounds for our leadership to show concern and ask the question, what's the matter? Why is the US ahead of us? This shows that the Soviet Union believed that they were winning the space race, but they began to worry when the US started to catch up.
In 1961, the Apollo program began, with the first few years primarily focused on research and testing to aid the flights to come. Sadly, on January 27, 1967, Apollo 1 astronauts tragically died when their capsule caught fire during a test flight. It was a difficult start, but it ultimately helped NASA to improve the safety and efficiency of their subsequent spacecraft. Years later, NASA followed with multiple missions, testing the spacecraft and taking steps necessary to land a man on the moon.
On July 16, 1969, the historic Apollo 11 mission was launched, with over 600 million people watching anxiously, either in person, on television, or over the radio. It was a huge event not just for the US, but for the whole world. People across the globe gathered to watch this miraculous event unfold. However, the Soviet Union, China, North Korea, and South Vietnam decided not to broadcast this event live to their public. Despite this, everybody watching or listening to the moon landing held their breaths as Neil Armstrong took the first steps on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The astronaut Neil Armstrong was soon joined by Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon. Meanwhile, their other companion, Michael Collins, waited anxiously for their return while on the command module, hovering above the moon. Neil and Buzz then conducted experiments, collected lunar samples, took pictures, and placed an American flag on the moon. Not only did they do this, but they caused a turning point in history by opening up a whole new world of exploration and discovery. After 21 hours and 36 minutes on the moon, Neil and Buzz returned to the command module, and they all headed back to Earth. The world celebrated the return of these astronauts, stunned by this incredible feat, and knowing for sure that this was a turning point in history.
After the astronauts returned from their historic moonwalk, they embarked on a global tour to meet with leaders of various countries. It was universally acknowledged that the moon landing was not just an American accomplishment, but a feat for all of humankind. It served as a reminder of how everyone is human and brought people together for a brief moment in time. Apollo 11 brought hope for the future of the world. Many countries' views on America changed after Apollo 11, which opened up opportunities for treaties, negotiations, and collaborations. Even though the landing of Apollo 11 united the world, it also divided it. Many viewed this endeavor as a waste of natural resources. Despite this, 6 more moon missions followed Apollo 11.
Almost 20 years following Apollo 11, several country space programs, including the US and Russia, built the International Space Station, also known as the ISS. It is a large structure in orbit around Earth that serves as a temporary home for astronauts, a research center, and a place for people from different countries to connect and work together.
Orbiting Earth in the spaceship, I saw how beautiful our planet is. People, let us preserve and increase this beauty, not destroy it. Yuri Gagarin.
The moon landing not only helped us see the moon, but also our own planet. Following the Apollo program, it became more apparent that there were environmental issues that needed to be addressed. One such issue was carbon emissions and CO2 pollution in the Earth's atmosphere. Images of Earth taken during the Apollo program helped the world see just how fragile our little planet is. This led to the environmental movement and to the establishment of Earth Day. Apollo 11 let us see the Earth through new eyes and helped us realize action needed to be taken. The thing that really surprised me was that it, Earth, projected an air of fragility. And why? I don't know. I don't know to this day. I had a feeling it's tiny, it's shiny, it's beautiful, it's home, and it's fragile. Michael Collins, Apollo 11.
Another major thing that Apollo 11 contributed to our world was new technologies. CAT scanners started out as a device to find imperfections in space components. Cordless tools were first made for astronauts to drill into the lunar surface. Ear thermometers were originally used to detect the birth of stars, and memory foam was used on the inside of astronauts' helmets before it was used for mattresses. The race to the moon didn't end with Apollo 11. NASA has officially announced plans to launch a new space program called the Artemis program. They are planning to land people on the moon for the first time since the Apollo program no earlier than 2026. This time, not only the US has plans to land on the moon, but so does China, India, and Japan. The new space race has begun, and it will affect our world in so many ways, but it wouldn't have been possible without Apollo 11.
Apollo 11 was a significant achievement for the world. It paved the way for subsequent space exploration, inspired others to venture into space, and fostered relationships between countries. It enabled the world to see the Earth as it was and led to the resolution of some environmental issues. It also brought many inventions that revolutionized our daily lives. Apollo 11 caused the world to go from a world of distrust and fear to a world open to the idea of communication and collaboration. Apollo 11 inspired us all to reach for the stars.